Riker,
Yo.
we're talking Fred VanVleet.
Mm-hmm.
Can we re-sign Fred VanVleet over the summer? He's been the leader of the bench mob, the best bench in the league, our second starting lineup, the heart and soul. He's the Kyle Lowry of the bench mob. We need to keep Fred VanVleet.
Yeah, and it's important that we clarify this and preface this entire discussion that we want us, as putting ourselves in the shoes of the owners, we want VanVleet back on the team. If you are watching this and you don't think that we should re-sign Fred VanVleet, type it in the comments. Explain your reason, because that is just craziness.
Explain your blasphemy. That's what we need to hear. If you disagree with re-signing Fred VanVleet, obviously to something semi-reasonable.
Yeah. So so we'll start with explaining what the situation is. So currently the Raptors are sitting at a team. All their salaries is $116 million this year. 120. How many? Couple of million. 126 million. It's on the screen. My apologies. I had to flick to it. So we're over the tax. So the cap. So in case you're not aware of what the situation is surrounding salary caps and cap situation and the luxury tax, I'll explain it now just to make it a little bit more clear. So essentially, the cap is determined based off of projected basketball-related income of the year, so defined by the league and then the collective bargaining agreement, so the players' union. So this season, the cap was set at $99.1 million, which is the highest that it's ever been. So clearly you can see that the Raptors are already over this cap. So we've heard a lot, perhaps you have too, the soft cap and the hard cap. That's not really a thing. It sort of is, but it has to do with exceptions. So luxury tax comes into play. If you exceed $119 million, then you have to pay an additional $1.50 for every dollar. So there's a multiplier. So every bit that you're over this $119 million, which you would probably consider the hard cap, you're paying a bonus tax on all of your profits. And then if you're a repeat offender, if you go even more over, then you have to pay a higher multiplier. So $2.50 per every dollar. So essentially you just pay more and more money the more you go over the hard cap.
And the Bruno trade, this trade deadline, helped with us staying under that very hard cap this season, so we won't be a repeat offender. And you'll get into why we don't want to be a repeat offender.
It's potentially. Okay, so then the soft cap. So the soft cap is technically the 99.1. The hard cap is the 119. That could be flexible going into next season, but you're able to exceed either. Right, so the hard cap doesn't mean you can't go over. It just means that you have to pay additional money in this luxury tax. So then tax breaks comes into play. So if you're a mid-level exception, if you exceed $119 million, if you're above 100, or if you're above 99.1 and under $119 million, then you get an exception of $8.4 million. And then if you're below the 99.1, then you'd pay no additional taxes and get a $4.3 million exception. So all of this kind of means, to put it into a scenario, we have, if we're looking at the Warriors, the Golden State Warriors, how are they able to sign Steph Curry to the max contract, $200 million deal, re-sign Kevin Durant, re-sign Sean Livingston, Andre Iguodala? They're obviously well over $119 million, so they had a 5.2 mid-level exception. Of that money, then they were able to sign Nick Young, so they paid him with the exception money that they got, right? Also, the franchise is willing to pay the additional luxury tax. So there's no sweet spot, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but there's no maximum amount that you can pay in the additional luxury tax. That's up to the franchise at that point, at how much they're willing to allow the owners to go over. So that's something that Masai Ujiri and MLSE would have to talk about. Are only contenders willing to pay? Normally, but that's not always the case. The benefits of staying under the cap would be, well, obviously you're able to sign players and facilitate trades a little bit easier, and then especially with the upcoming free agency, it's a really huge class. If you would want to have money, but that's not what the Raptors are looking for. We're just looking at Fred VanVleet. We're not really.
We got that first seed squad.
I mean, we have our bench unit's incredible. That is what we want to keep until the future. So we're gonna move this. Well, actually, I'll say it right now. So essentially, Masai Ujiri has said that MLSE is 100% confirmed to be willing to dip into the luxury tax of an undefined amount, as long as they are a contender, which we are this season. We're the best team, almost the best team in the entire league. Go ahead.
As you said, Masai Ujiri doesn't want to go into the hard cap, become a repeat offender in paying the luxury tax if we aren't contending for a championship, if we aren't a top tier team in the East.
Yeah.
And we've proven that we are that level this season. Obviously, being the top of the East, being the first seed, having a really, really good shot at the finals. We'll see how the playoffs run out. But
yeah. But the last thing that I'll say. So essentially, so they're willing to go over the luxury tax. There's two things about that. So it's not defined. We obviously MLSE wouldn't be willing to disclose that, or even Masai Ujiri. They're smarter than that. So assuming, even first. So despite our cap status right now, which is well over the hard cap, do the Raps technically have any bad contracts right now? So that's what we'll talk about, right? But I would argue that there's no bad contracts on the team except for maybe Norman Powell.
I agree.
Okay, but then assuming we want to have more space, so assuming that the MLSE is willing to go into the luxury tax, but they define it at some random amount, an arbitrary amount. So say they say we're not willing to allow you to spend over $150 million on the year. Then this is really what the conversation is about. What are different situations that we can do to be able to sign Fred VanVleet at varying effects to the salary cap? So, all right, you take it away. That's the kind of, I don't know, perhaps boring, perhaps interesting explanation of what legalistically and financially is going on. But now we're getting into the fun stuff.
Yeah, a lot of numbers, a lot of crazy facts on that. But Raptors fans just want to know, can we get Fred VanVleet back this season? Yeah. And you talked about all the numbers. I'm going to bring up some more. If you looked at 2016 offseason, there was a lot of players getting absolutely lucrative contracts. You see Matthew Dellavedova getting over 12, 13 million a year. Just huge numbers for players that aren't even at Fred VanVleet's level. But,
yeah, fair.
You know, what were you going to say?
No, I mean, we would agree, but like Matthew Dellavedova is proven in the NBA. Like, he's not amazing, but like he was on a couple of good teams.
But he has never led the bench mob.
That's true.
Never led a bench mob. He has never led a bench.
He has never led a bench mob. He has zero clout.
Yeah. These lucrative contracts are kind of waning a little bit more. I think people overprojected how much the salary cap would rise. We saw Lou Williams, six-man like Lou Will. He's having an all-star caliber season. Obviously, he's a lot older than Fred. Comes off the bench most of the time. I think he's been waning through the starters and bench for the Clippers this season. Yeah. But he just signed an extension for a 3-year, $24 million
Okay,
extension.
So only $8 million a year. And he arguably should have been an all-star.
Yes. So Fred's obviously been awesome. Lou Williams has been better. I think we could both agree this season. But Fred's obviously younger and a better defender. Yeah. And all these things. But that's the money Lou Williams is getting. Yeah. So that's a bit different from the huge lucrative contracts like the Timofey Mozgov absurd contract that was being handed out in 2016. Over last summer, we saw Sean Livingston get a 3-year, $24 million deal. Darren Collison. So
essentially your point is, so you have a bunch of players. Essentially your point is that the Raptors probably won't make an unreasonable contract, like offer an unreasonable contract. But you're saying that we shouldn't be as concerned about another team swooping in and offering Fred VanVleet something crazy, because the trend is teams have been overpaying for guys that aren't proven or aren't necessarily superstars. So you're saying
no teams have that money.
No teams have the money. Okay, so that's a fair argument.
And they're becoming more reasonable. That even happened because I know people are going to come up with the comparison. Because we had a similar situation with Bismack Biyombo in 2016, that crazy summer. Yeah. And the Raptors wanted to keep him. He was our guy. He's so amazing in the playoffs, and he ended up going to Orlando. Thing is, Orlando Magic offered him, I believe it was a 4-year, $18 million per year contract.
Yeah, it was something stupid. It was dumb stupid.
I love me some Biz. Still one of my all-time favorite Raptors. But for a guy that averaged about 5 points and 5 rebounds per game, $18 million. Yeah, that's something the Raptors couldn't match.
It was absurd. So we'll look at Fred VanVleet first with what if they're not assuming that they want to go even more into the luxury tax, right? And not assuming that we're going to trade any players yet. So just the very first sort of consideration would be pay him the mid-level exception, so $5 million a year. Do you think Fred would accept that? And do you think teams would match that or pay him more?
I think teams would definitely pay him more than the mid-level exception.
Yeah, I agree.
Because Fred is still a very young guy. I think that's the one thing. He plays like such a veteran. He plays like he's been in the league. He's been in 18 NBA finals. He's just so confident, never gets shook. But he's still a young player. And I brought up the names Darren Collison, Sean Livingston. They're getting about a mean between $7 million and $10 million.
Yeah.
And I'd argue that Fred has been better than both of them, and at a much younger age.
Yeah, no, I agree. He has upside, and he's been really reliable. Okay, so with that being said, because some of the people, some of the commenters, I love the feedback. Said that Fred he wants to play on the Raptors team. He would re-sign he would take a pay cut to play with the Raptors. I mean, I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think that he's been great. I think he's been amazing. I think that everybody. I mean, we just had CJ Miles. If you were watching at some point during the Dallas game, they showed a tweet that he just recently had, and he was like, Toronto Raptors has been the most fun that I've ever had in my entire life playing basketball. So this is just a franchise and an organization that just fosters the best, brings the best out of everybody. But at that same time, you're right. If the potential is there for him to sign a team that's good, give him more responsibility and get more money, I mean, I think that would be hard to say no to.
Yeah, and he shouldn't. And as a huge Raptors fan, obviously, I want Fred VanVleet to stay and to have all the luxury tax money. But he is a human being. He's undrafted. He's, last season, Fred was just fighting to be on a roster.
Yeah.
So for him to be able to get this money, get a huge contract, I think he should go for it. Hopefully it's with the Raptors. If it isn't, shout out to Fred. Go get that bag.
True, we wouldn't hate him for it, but let's not put this pessimistic viewpoint. Tell us about what we could do. What are some options here?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the number. I think, just to sum up that topic, I think we'd have to pay Fred similar to what we gave Norm this summer, maybe a little bit more.
Okay, yeah.
He is still undrafted, only really has one proven season under his belt, but I think 10, 11, 12 million per year for Fred is somewhere we could see it. If we could get him for less than that, that would be amazing, but that's where I project him to see it. But as I just brought up the name Norman Powell, if the Raptors don't want to go very deep into the luxury tax, I think he's the most out there, most blatant person to trade, and the most reasonable. I think you would agree.
Yep.
As it's been well noted, Norman Powell has underperformed this season. I still have the theory that he's holding back for the playoffs because Norm is just the secret weapon in the playoffs that's going to overthrow Golden State, obviously. But that's yet to be seen. We're going to assume that doesn't happen as of right now.
Yeah.
Going to the contracts. But, yeah, I think there's a lot, even though Norm has had a down season, he's still a very young guy. He can, in theory, shoot threes and play defense. That's a player that every NBA team wants. We saw the Orlando Magic trade Serge Ibaka for Terrence Ross, who isn't as good of a defender as Norm, and despite Norm's inconsistencies, T. Ross was more inconsistent.
Yeah,
so,
no, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I think we wouldn't have to do a DeMarre Carroll sort of deal to get rid of Norm and to clear luxury tax. I think a team would, like the Kings or the Bulls, that's rebuilding, that needs a young, solidified wing, I think they'd take a risk on Norm.
The only issue is, to me, Norman Powell and Jonathan Simmons are very similar. And Jonathan Simmons had a breakout year with the Spurs, and then and then the Orlando Magic swooped in to try to get him on a high, and then he ended up underperforming for the Magic. So, and I think that the issue with this season is the less that they play Norm, the more diminished his actual market value or his trade value around the league becomes. So it would be hard with a pretty hefty contract. I mean, nearly $10 million a year. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. The Bulls, but that's assuming that they watched his season prior to this and they believe that he has potential and that he just didn't fit into the Raptors system, right? So I think
all NBA scouts know the players. Yes, I think they try and leverage the fact that he didn't play much against the Raptors this season, and that is a good point. That could be something to worry about. But I don't think Norm's value is nearly as diminished as DeMarre Carroll was. I think Norman Powell is just lost in the rotation. The bench mob has been so ridiculous that he hasn't had an opportunity to play and be able to show what he's got. So obviously we won't be able to get much back for Norm, but I think a team would definitely take him.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
But let us know what you guys think. I could be wrong.
Yeah, fair. Another option, or do you want to wrap it up there, or should we keep going?
I think we could talk about a couple more of the more lucrative things the Raptors could do.
Yeah, so what I'm looking at now, essentially, like, we could not re-sign because we have the team. Oh, I forget what the rubric is called, but
a team option.
Team option, yeah. We have the team option for Bebe, so that would save up a little, like $4 million.
Like, we can throw him a qualifying offer.
But we're still above. We're still above the 119.
Yep.
The season after, and that's without him even having a contract. So I mean, I don't even know if we'll be able to re-sign Bebe.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna.
I don't think we'll pursue it.
I love Bebe. I love me some Bebe. Love for him to be back on the roster, but $4.4 million for our third string center. I think Bebe will be good on an NBA roster, but the fact we got Jonas hitting threes now, and Yak just proving to be the future big man for the Toronto Raptors, Yak is going to be ridiculous once he stops getting the refs. Once the refs stop calling these ticky-tack calls, these young big man calls, I think he could show the potential to be one of the best big men in the NBA.
Yeah,
that might be a hot take, but I think two of those guys have solidified themselves ahead of Bebe, despite the face tats. So I think Bebe will have to go, but
yeah. But you're right. I think that doesn't really, relative to the impact it would make on the salary cap right now. It's really the big contract players, right?
Yep.
So who would you be comfortable with dealing away for a couple of smaller pieces, or somebody that we could sign and cut, or maybe trade away, like, plus a future pick or something like that? Like, what would your opinion be on? Essentially, we're looking at the starters and maybe CJ Miles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would want to. I don't think that's necessary, especially with MLS saying that they'll pay the luxury tax.
To get rid of any of them?
I think Serge is the most reasonable out of that group. Maybe Jonas, but Jonas is only 25 years old and is shown to be really good. Serge is getting a lot of money. I think that could be a tough contract, especially in the last year or next year going forward. But he's a win-now player, and he's proven it in the playoffs. He's probably our best player in the Bucks series last season. Obviously, he's going to have his ups and downs in the regular season. He's a worn-out player. Like, you see it on the court every now and then. You can see he's a step slow on back-to-backs, but there's no back-to-backs in the postseason. So I think he fits and warrants that big deal, even if it's a little bit of an overpay. So I wouldn't want to get rid of anybody, but if it was a player to get rid of, I guess it would be Serge.
Yeah, I don't even really want to make an opinion on it, given there's too much to consider. Let us know what you guys think about if there's any starters or CJ Miles that you would be willing to trade for some sort of thing to conjure up a bit more cap space to be able to re-sign Fred. I think it's also dependent upon how we play in this playoffs.
Yep.
But I mean, you're right. I mean, there's upsides and downsides to both. Ibaka, you're right, is getting older. There may be a market for him. JV, like, at the beginning of the season, we didn't think they would be played really at all. But he's just shown that he's willing to put in the work to improve his game all around, and he's become a guy
his defense looks great as of late, which is a great sight.
Yeah, so I mean, my hate for JV is gone completely. It's completely erased at the beginning of the season. So just let us know what you guys think about that. I think that ultimately, go ahead first before I say it.
Yeah, one final thing on bringing back Fred.
Yep.
So obviously, Fred's going to get a long-term deal.
Yeah.
If he signs an extension.
You would hope.
That only makes sense.
You would hope.
He's an undrafted player. He just put in an absolutely amazing season.
Yeah, he wants to
get those years, Fred.
Yeah.
But the year later, the next season, DeLon Wright's rookie scale deal is up.
Yeah, then we'd have to do it again.
Well, that's something you have to take into account.
I would rather.
Would you rather?
I would rather
Fred
VanVleet. I would rather Fred.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, that's just something to throw out there.
Everybody, Matt, Leo, Jack, they all say, like, Fred has a place in the closing minutes. Fred in the fourth quarter makes sense. They don't say DeLon in the fourth quarter makes sense. And that's not to say DeLon doesn't have upside. I mean, he beats Fred in athleticism. He beats Fred in sort of defensive ability, I guess, if you're looking at length and considering length. And they're just two completely different players. But it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. And he's older.
DeLon is older.
But I think, if there was only an option to pick one or the other, I would pick Fred VanVleet.
And DeLon has had a lot of injuries in his career. I think Fred is the reasonable choice. I think that's and it's arguable. It's not 100%. Fred is a lot better than DeLon right now. But especially with the points you brought up, his size and athleticism and his continuously improving three-point shot. So I think that's just something they have to take into account. and the fact that we do have DeLon on one more year of a cheap contract, and Lorenzo Brown back there too. So
true.
Masai.
Okay, let's finish off on this. Let's finish off on this actually. So I'll say what I think could happen, and what I think will happen. You say what you think could happen, and what I think will happen. All right. So could, or I guess more properly termed, what I would like to see happen is that yes, we get rid of Norm somehow. No offense to Norm, but that's just the way it goes. Clear up a bit of space, and then MLSE is comfortable in dipping into the luxury tax to a certain amount, and we give Fred $10 or $11 million a year for like 4 or 5 years, right? That's what I would like to see happen ideally. And we don't even consider DeLon. We think of all that for the next year, and I would hope that would happen because obviously Masai and the whole developmental unit, they understand how good these players are, right? I would hope that they value them rather than somebody else in the league who we just see on another team playing well.
Exactly.
What I think could happen is that we're so good at developing players that if Fred demands or is offered a big contract for some team that's stupid to offer him like a $20 million, that I think that then I think that Masai is going to say, well, our developmental unit's been so good, we'll just conjure up another Fred VanVleet and Lorenzo Brown or somebody else that we have down there.
And that, as phenomenal as Fred's been, it wouldn't be devastating as we still have DeLon Wright as the backup point guard.
That's true.
Lorenzo Brown's shown he can play in the NBA, and as you said, keep the development coming in. Jerry Stackhouse is the man. Dwayne Casey is the man. For our whole coaching staff is just awesome at developing players.
Yep.
Even with DeMar, we've seen his development. But that's it. I agree with you. I agree with you on what's probably going to happen. But in my ideal world, what I want to happen is Norman Powell average 30 points per game in the playoffs. We keep him. Bill Gates buys the Toronto Raptors, doesn't worry about the luxury tax ever again, and just signs everyone for a $30 million contract.
And we just become the most despised team in the league. We become the New York Yankees of the NBA.
Yep.
As a Raptors fan, I wouldn't attest to it.
Yep. So that's our takes. We went long here. Very, very interesting topic. Let us know what you guys think, and subscribe, like if you like. We got a lot of cool stuff coming, as Ryker has mentioned on the past pods. Raptors going to the championship, Ryker.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best way to justify us giving all of our players huge contracts. This is the year.
Exactly.
All right.
Anyways, thanks for listening.
Cheers.